thank you everyone for coming. I'm Carrie Kennedy and I'm the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. On behalf of the board of directors of RFK Human Rights, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 39th annual Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. We are honored to have with us today leaders Steny Hoyer, Senator Chris Coons, Representative David Cicilline, Representative Asamba, the Cameroonian ambassador to the United States, our 2022 Human Rights Award laureates, Nkongho, Felix, Agbor, Balla, and Maximilienne Nkongho. Yeah. My fabulous daughter, Cara Kennedy Cuomo, is here, and she serves on the board of RFK Human Rights along with Peter Edelman, Antonio Burgos. We also have our leadership council members, George Bradenberg, Richard Dong, Eric Dong, and Joe Eldridge, our judge. It fell through the hole. Our former judge and our trustee, Bobby Smith, and so many others. A special shout out to our Africa litigation team, Wade McMullen, Angelita Bayans, Ika Chukwu, Ugo, Christy, and Jessica. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks especially to all of the RFK staff who are here. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who has devoted his entire life to public service and who personifies President Kennedy's call, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Our great, dear, fabulous friend, Steny Hoyer.
Good afternoon. I came here this afternoon to be introduced by Carrie Kennedy, as effusive as she is. Over the top, but nevertheless, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carrie. Not only thank you, but thank all the board members of the RFK Human Rights Foundation. Thank all of the contributors to the foundation. And thank the staff of the foundation who labor on behalf of people that we do not know and may never know and who may never know us, but whose lives we hope to change and make better. So I am very pleased to be here with all of you. Senator Coons and I have been with Carrie to South Africa, along with Cara, and George Bradenberg, my dear friend, who has also done so much for human rights. He and his wife, for those with Alzheimer's. Thank you very much, George, for your service as well. Maximilienne, Carrie made a good try at your last name, and Nkongho, I think it is, or about there. Is that pretty close? And then I love Balla, because he's got a name that I'm not going to try, but he's got a short name, Balla. So that makes it a lot simpler for us. So thank you very much. My dear friend, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon from Pennsylvania, thank you for your leadership and your service in the Congress of the United States. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. And I am honored to be included in honoring two giants who every day speak out on behalf of those who need a voice and those who need help. Yesterday marked the 56th anniversary of Carrie's father, Robert Kennedy, delivering his famed Day of Affirmation address in Cape Town, South Africa. In it, he argued that we must recognize the full human equality of all people, not because, he said, it's economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God command it, although they do, not because people of other lands wish it so. We must do it, he said, for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do. And in my church, the church would have said, amen. We Baptists do that, you know. Of course, Kennedy was speaking in reference to South Africans' efforts to throw off the yoke of apartheid. But his message endures today as we continue the fight to ensure the human dignity of all. His words certainly resonate with those in Cameroon, another African nation struggling daily to contend with a painful legacy of colonialism. The civil war between French and English speaking, how sad it is, because we speak a different language, but we're the same color and from the same land, that we have these differences. The Irish know about that. A different religion, same language, same people, but a different religion. How often and tragically we take small differences and magnify them into great discomfort. The civil war between the French and English-speaking Cameroonians has been devastating, leading to the deaths of 9,000 people and the displacement of over 1 million others since 2014. Those are big numbers for a small country. They're even bigger, as we know, in Ukraine, whose flag I wear, where the pain and suffering being caused by Putin is so evident on a daily basis. In the midst of the violence in Cameroon, there are people striving, however, to bridge the fissures of language and culture that divide the country. They do so despite the risk of arbitrary arrest, detention, and extraordinary killings. We are fortunate, we are honored to be honoring these two advocates of human rights, of peace, of reconciliation. For 30 years, Maximilienne has promoted peace, equality, and democracy, not only in Cameroon, but throughout Central Africa through her leadership at organizations like Central African Human Rights Defenders Network. Similarly, as a legal officer for the International Criminal Court, a human rights officer for the United Nations, and now director of the Center for the Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, Balla has worked in Cameroon and around the world to defend human rights and to hold governments accountable. That is necessary in every part of the world, but particularly in parts of the world where so much pain and suffering occurs. Maximilienne and Balla undertake this work with immense courage, given the severe dangers it poses to their personal security. Years ago, Maximilienne made the difficult decision to send her children to France to ensure their safety after receiving death threats for her work. And in 2017, Cameroonian officials arbitrarily imprisoned Balla for organizing peaceful protests to protect the rights of the Anglophone population in his country. How sad it is that so many people have served time in jail for advocating the rights of others that theoretically are guaranteed by our morality and indeed, in the United States of America, our documents. Martin Luther King Jr. was such a man. My dear and close friend, and Carrie's close friend, John Lewis, who recently left us, was such a man. Throughout my years on the U.S. Helsinki Commission and as a member of the congressional leadership who remains devoted to human rights, I've met many leaders who have taken similar risks to inspire others to secure their rights and a better future for their countries. From dissidents under Soviet tyranny to Russians living today under Vladimir Putin's regime, from Darfur to Rwanda and other places where genocide has occurred, these defenders of basic rights and freedoms have displayed an unparalleled resolve. We confer these awards to Maximilienne and Balla because their perseverance in the face of repression captures the same ethos that Robert F. Kennedy articulated in Cape Town in 1966 and for which he lived his entire life. In that speech, he explained further, moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality for those who seek to change the world, which yields most painfully to change. Justice Kennedy inspires us today. Maximilienne and Balla serve as examples to future generations and to this generation of human rights advocates, hopefully making that commodity of courage a little less rare. We will congratulate them and award them in just a minute. I thank you, courage and the difference you're making in our world. God bless you.
Thank you, Leader Hoyer, for those beautiful remarks and really heartfelt and so kind about my dad and about these incredible heroes. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Chris Coons. Senator Coons has been a leading voice in condemning violence in our country and across the world. In the wake of the mass shootings in Texas, he is a leading proponent of achievable gun legislation, red flag laws, and background checks for 18 to 21-year-olds who attempt to purchase guns. As we stand here 54 years and one day since my own father was gunned down, I want to thank you personally, really thank you. It's so hard in this country to get this gun legislation passed. It's so hard, and it should be so easy. And your voice really makes a difference. Senator Coons has also been a leading proponent of ending human rights abuses in Cameroon, in large part because of his advocacy and because of the advocacy of our fantastic team at RFK Human Rights and our partners at Haitian Bridge Alliance. 40,000 Cameroonians, refugees in the United States, were recently granted temporary protection status, so they will not be returned. Please welcome the co-founder of the Senate Human Rights Caucus, Senator Chris Coons.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for your lifetime of witness and service, for the passion and power that you bring to your public service each and every day, and for everybody who is a part of the RFK Human Rights Foundation. If you just pause for a moment and think about the arc of Senator Kennedy's life, of what a difference he made in the short time he had, and how much more of a difference he might have made if not cut down by an assassin's bullet, it is a reminder of the urgency and the importance of our legislating here in Congress in a way that brings some measure of comfort or safety. Earlier today on the Judiciary Committee, we had a hearing on domestic terrorism in the United States where someone who had lost his mother in Buffalo in a grocery store was testifying. And it was just a reminder of how many families live for decades with the pain of loss as a result of gun violence. So thank you, Carrie, for your opening remarks. Thank you, Steny Hoyer. Congressman Hoyer has been a great friend and a companion. Someone at the end of his comments, I said, what do you need me here for? You've said everything that is worth saying. One of the great blessings of service is getting to know folks who really share your values and your priorities and from whom you can learn and who can serve as a mentor. And Steny, you've been a great source of inspiration to me for decades. As we were talking just before this event formally began, he was urgently pressing me on national service and on ways that we can inspire another generation of Americans into service to our country and our world, much as Senator Kennedy did. Thank you to everybody else who is here, my friend, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, and everybody who is part of the human rights community that is gathering for this year's RFK, and George Vredenberg, obviously, for your tireless dedication to making the world a better place and to confronting illness and advancing human rights. I am so honored to be a part of this celebration of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, recognizing the power of individual strength and courage, but also the urgency of collective moral courage, of reaching across lines of division that those in power try to draw and to sharpen, to divide us and weaken us. And the example of these two great advocates who, through their individual work and through the organizations they lead and through their collaboration and partnership, show what is possible in harmony and in collaboration. It was, as Congressman Hoyer mentioned, just 56 years ago that Senator Kennedy delivered an important address known as the Ripples of Hope speech at the University of Cape Town, on the campus of a university that was in the context of a country at that time struggling through the birth pangs of a liberation movement against apartheid, a hateful, divisive, race-based means of oppression that really mirrored Jim Crow segregation here in the United States. The United States and South Africa are, of course, different countries with different histories, but white supremacy enshrined in law as a hateful ideology that divided these two nations internally against themselves was an important feature of what was going on in these two countries at that moment. And that speech that Senator Kennedy delivered was the conclusion of what was an historic week, a week in which he visited with Nobel Peace Prize winner Chief Albert Luthuli, visited Soweto, and heard from and spoke with those who were living in a so-called township, a racially identified, exclusive, repressive zone within larger Johannesburg. Visited the University of the Witwatersrand, also in the Johannesburg area, and then spoke to students at the University of Cape Town. And part of what was important about that speech was that then Senator Kennedy recognized that small acts of courage cumulatively over time and across the world inspire other acts of courage. If I could share with you the quote that is in the program, but that is best known as being at the center of the speech he delivered that day. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man or woman stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send out a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Congressman Hoyer and I were blessed to join Kerry Kennedy and our friend and colleague, Congressman John Lewis, and two women who had survived the racist assault on Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. In retracing Senator Kennedy's steps and in hearing a reflection from South African leaders and from Kerry about the cumulative impact of that witness, that challenge, that call from Senator Kennedy. I also, while we were on that trip, had a chance to reconnect with a minister, a priest who I'd lived with on the outskirts of Soweto in 1987, who risked his life on a daily basis during the struggle against apartheid. This is the Reverend Paul Vereen, and who had done so as a faithful witness against the ways in which the apartheid regime in the 1980s was still decades after that speech, drawing lines of division and trying to successfully sustain their oppressive rule. Maximilienne and Felix, your work is difficult. It is indispensable. If we think about it, one of the most important tools of authoritarians is fear. Fear of individual oppression, whether through a temporary arrest and detention, fear of the safety of your children, fear of the loss of privilege or position, fear for your own physical safety. And it is your courage, your insistence that you continue to serve and act in the face of fear that is one of those generators of hope, those ripples of hope of which Senator Kennedy spoke. Human rights endure because of the risks, the sacrifices made by unspeakably brave individuals like yourselves, who work tirelessly at great personal risk and cost to advance them. Democratic institutions endure because of individuals who try and work and try and sustain their effort to make the world just a little bit better every day. So today we recognize you for your persistence, for your courage, for your effort. But as Congressman Hoyer recognized, Would that you were a senator. It is also bridging these differences that are so sharply seen in Cameroon, where differences of language are being mobilized by those who would oppress and divide a nation that is not so different across language. So the ways in which you have collaborated across Anglophone and Francophone Cameroon is a spirit that we here in the Congress should be called to emulate. Our own nation knew a horrible civil war that was the most violent and destructive war in the history of our country. Regional differences, differences of structure, differences of history were sharpened and sharpened until we had a 5-year cataclysm of civil war. And the 9,000 Cameroonians who have died in the current conflict in Cameroon are just one small measure of the division and the sacrifice in Cameroon today that we should all be working to bridge in the spirit that you've brought to this work. In my service here in the Senate, I've tried to also demonstrate an ability to work across divisions of political party and of difference and to enact legislation. I have a number of bills I could talk about, but I think we should turn to the honorees today. Let me just simply conclude by saying, as the co-chair of the Senate Human Rights Caucus, it is my honor, Carrie, to join with you in recognizing the risk-taking, the persistence, and the insistence on justice of these two incredible individuals. All of us in the United States are honored to be a small part of today's ceremony, recognizing and lifting up the remarkable work that you have done and the ways in which that we can support you going forward are just the opening chapter of what I know will be a long and successful career moving Cameroon towards reconciliation and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for those inspiring words from the heart, and are so meaningful to me and to all of our family, to all of our staff, to everyone here today. Thank you. On March 16th, 1968, well, I should begin by saying I know you guys might need to leave, so we're just so appreciative to all of you for coming. On March 16th, 1968, along with my parents and 8 brothers and sisters, I got into the back of our station wagon and drove from Virginia to the Russell Senate office building, to this building. And we got out and came into this very room. And I know one person who's in this room was there that day, Peter Adelman, right here. And just as Uncle Jack had done a few years earlier, my father said these words right here. I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. And then he continued, I do not run for president merely to oppose any man, but to propose new policies. I run because I am convinced that this country is on a perilous course, and because I have such strong feelings about what must be done, and I feel I'm obliged to do all that I can. I run to seek new policies, policies to end the bloodshed in Vietnam and in our cities, policies to close the gaps that now exist between Black and white, between rich and poor, between young and old, in this country and around the rest of the world. I run for the presidency because I want the Democratic Party in the United States of America to stand for hope instead of despair, for reconciliation instead of growing risk of world war. I run because it is now unmistakably clear that we can change these disastrous, divisive policies only by changing the men who are now making them. It is easy to hear Robert Kennedy's voice speaking out in our country as he did 50 years ago on the madness of gun violence, the shame of police brutality, the need for compassion in welcoming immigrants and refugees, defying the easy call to war and where war has broken out, the moral necessity of seeking peace. One imagines him urging us to focus on the destructive force of hate, from Boko Haram in Cameroon and Nigeria to ISIS in Iraq and Syria, to the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in Europe, the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in Myanmar. Here at home, you can hear his voice echo across the decades on the need to address the future of jobs for able-bodied, proud Americans, to address the disillusionment which has caused the opioid crisis and the parallel increase of suicide rates among middle-aged white men, and to address the inherent unfairness of a criminal legal system which discriminates based on race and class, where thousands go to jail simply because they are too poor to make bail, the new Jim Crow. In Notre Dame, he said, "What other reason do we have really for our existence as human beings unless we've made some contribution to somebody else to improve their lives?" Bobby Kennedy's presence was grounded not only in policy, but especially in values, values that never wavered, values that stand in high contrast with too much of certain political leadership today. Integrity, courage, faith, humanism, patriotism, all tempered by curiosity, children and dogs, laughter and fun, and most especially love. I wanted to start my remarks today by invoking my father, because after all, this award was named for him, but most especially because his leadership, tough and courageous and demanding, was always, always grounded in love. Today, we honor these two leaders of a country half a world away, a country which is also grappling with conflict and division and rage, and has produced these two leaders whose lives, like that of Bobby Kennedy, is tough and courageous and demanding and always, always grounded in love. We honored two visionary leaders, Maximilienne and Felix, courageous activists who embody the civil society efforts from the Anglophone and Francophone regions of Cameroon. At grave personal risk, these two lawyers took up the cause of justice, organizing, advocating, and creating a more fair and peaceful future for the next generation of their countrywomen and men. In one of the most dire yet underreported crises in the world, Cameroon is embroiled in a humanitarian debacle and internal armed conflict that have displaced more than 1 million people from their homes and thrown 2.2 million Cameroonians into desperate need for humanitarian assistance. As a legacy of the arbitrary borders carved into the continent through the cruelties of colonialism, today, Cameroon is home to a French-speaking majority and an English-speaking minority people. When the national government appointed Francophone judges over the English-speaking regions and threatened to outlaw the teaching of English in schools in 2016, it sparked massive peaceful protests led by Anglophile teachers unions and lawyers who marched to protect their cultural and linguistic heritage. Rather than engaging the peaceful protesters over their demands, state security forces responded with brutal repression, committing well-documented war crimes and engaging in a systemic violence against innocent civilians. Government militias committed murder and torture, burned villages to ashes, and rounded up thousands and thousands of innocent people in acts of arbitrary and massive detention. In an unprecedented act of denial of free speech and right to information, the government shut down the internet for 3 months. These crimes and the resulting response of armed separatists have created critical shortages of food, water, and medicines, housing, and healthcare that continue unabated to this day. In addition to the government-manufactured Anglophile crisis, civilians are also facing horrific attacks in the far north from the terrorist group Boko Haram, which forces child soldiers to commit suicide bombings of schools, mosques, and refugee camps. Amidst these terrifying and shocking conflicts, Cameroon is also experiencing the downfall of democracy and rights protections more generally. Elections in 2018 and 2020 were widely regarded as neither free nor fair. When hundreds of thousands of citizens rose up in protests, they were met by state security beatings and labeled violent agitators. Cameroon has been ruled for 40 years by Paul Balla, the longest running non-royal leader in the world and one of the world's most notorious autocrats. He and his government agents routinely target and harass members of the political opposition. They threaten, detain, and imprison journalists who report the truth and criticize government policies. State-sanctioned persecution of LGBTQ people continues to intensify. Every judge is appointed by the administration, and the courts are no longer considered independent. The police are seen by Cameroonians as the most corrupt institution in government. Transparency International ranks Cameroon in the top quartile of corrupt countries. In this incredibly difficult context, Maximilienne and Felix work tirelessly to protect human rights and hold the government accountable for systemic violations. They strive to ensure that the voices of civil society, especially human rights defenders, are protected. Daddy said, every generation inherits a world it never made, and as it does so, it automatically becomes the trustee of that world for those who seek to come after. In due course, each generation makes its accounting to its children, unquote. Maximilienne and Felix, the next generation have much to be grateful for with all you have done to realize a just and peaceful future. Now, Maximilienne. Since 2010, Maximilienne Nkongho has led the network of human rights defenders of Central Africa, known as REDOC. REDOC promotes civic space and protects fundamental freedoms throughout the 10 countries in the region. Under Maximilienne's leadership, REDOC investigates human rights abuses, advocates before regional human rights bodies, monitors democratic processes, and demands state accountability. She is a leading voice for the defense of journalists, political prisoners, and the LGBTQ community. In retaliation for her bravery, government agents have targeted Maximilienne, defamed her, attacked her, surveilled her, and threatened her with death. Still, with few resources beyond her own determination, she persists. Last year, Secretary Blinken presented her with the well-deserved State Department International Woman of Courage Award. Maximilienne, it is an honor to present you with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award.
Thank you so much. It's so difficult for me to add something, but let me try. Let me try because I am coming from Francophone area, and it's my honor to be there and to try to speak English with all my community. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights defenders, including my fellow award winner and human rights husband, Felix Balla. Yes, he's my husband. He's no distinguished members of the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Organization, dear Kerry. Thank you. Thank you. I am aware of the importance of this moment as I take the floor to tell you how the Central African Human Rights Defenders Network, REDAC, was deeply moved when we learned that I was honored with the 2022 Robert Foundation Kennedy Human Rights Award. As you can imagine, this good news has delighted our organization as a whole, our partners, and most importantly, all those who make the defense of human rights their lives purpose every day. On this occasion, I wish to express my deep gratitude to the REDAC staff, board, experts, and specifically Barrister Liscom, who for 10 years has admirably chaired the board of directors and is now the co-chair. The prize that I received today is, in a way, proof that they were not wrong to invest in the team that I lead. The same gratitude is addressed to the volunteers and the media who also devote themselves with zeal and competence to our mission. Ladies and gentlemen, from the bottom of my heart, I offer my sincere thanks to the volunteers and devout member of the prestigious Robert Foundation Kennedy Human Rights Organization. Why? For not only working to perpetuate the noble and visionary dream of this emblematic figure in the history of the United States of America, but also setting their sights on the REDAC. It goes without saying that the credit goes to REDAC, without which I would never have hoped to benefit from such great practice. Mille fois merci. I would also like to thank REDAC's international partners that provide us with support, funding, and all accompanying. On a daily basis, we are grateful to the National Endowment for Democracy, the National Democratic Institute. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, my brother. Thank you, Christopher. The Embassy of the United States in Cameroon, the government of Canada, the German government, the Embassy of Swaziland, the French Embassy, and the Facebook Foundation, to mention but a few. I dedicate this award to my family, women human rights defenders, and political prisoners in Cameroon and in Central Africa. My children, yes, my children. It's very, very difficult for me. They are not here today because they are not have a visa, but we did it. My children are heroes in their own right. Due to the demand and risk of my job, I have been away from them for years, and the risk of my job. And I am glad today know that their sacrifice is being recognized here in this moment. Thank you so much. Today, I think about my tender mother, whose nights are sleepless in concern for my safety and well-being. Thank you, Mother. I appreciate my partner, Norbert, who always stand by me in good and bad times. He's around. To beloved ones who have made the trip from Cameroon, please stand up, France, Canada, and beyond, to be here today. Arcadie and Mother, please. Bisous à tous. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rebirth Foundation Kennedy Human Rights Awards, for those on whom we base our reason for existence. The many victims of human rights violation and abuses scattered throughout Cameroon and Central Africa. It is in their courage, their strength of character, and their self-sacrifice that we draw the necessary energy to continue the fight. Whatever the cost, it is to these vulnerable people that I would like to dedicate this award. To those who, despite the brutality they have suffered, resist with dignity and courage, I would like to renew my encouragement. And to those who have sadly paid the ultimate price, I would like to ask us, all of us, ladies and gentlemen, please to stand and observe 1 minute silence in their revered memory and to think of their souls. May the soul of the departed rest in peace. Amen. Thank you. You may take your seats, please. Beyond the vote of confidence of these awards, which both bestow and magnify courage, these distinctions are a call to double our effort. Like Kerry said, like the senator said, REDAC as a legal entity, and I understand here the immensity of the task and the legitimate expectation that we now carry. I therefore take the solemn commitment here to invest ourselves without any reservation, to raise ourselves to the height of the expectation and the esteem that are those shown to us. Cameroon, my country, our country, and even the Central Africa region currently faces multiple issues. Democratic instability, restriction of fundamental freedoms, lack of independent institutions, including the judiciary, corruption, threats and attacks against human rights defenders and opposition figures. There are also multiple conflicts and humanitarian crises. This sub-regional socio-political instability in a crisis-prone environment has led to the reign of all-out repression of citizens, perpetrated by the authorities under the pretext of national security. And sometimes armed groups have emerged that also commit atrocities. The organizations of counterpower, those of civil society like us, which denounce this state of affairs, are then considered as fierce enemies to be systematically silenced, and their leaders chased, muzzled, arrested, and imprisoned. In these difficult working conditions, civil society organizations such as REDAC are caught in the crossfire because while we are suffering from the affliction of the so-called defense and security force, the armed groups from their own side suspect us of collision with the government. From then on, we are left to our own devices stuck between the vice and the anvil. Intimidation and threat of all kinds from those in power against us are our daily lot. In spite of these obstacles and this hostile environment to the promotion of human rights, our moral duty and our obligation to denounce and protect fundamental rights become absolutely imperatives. Whatever the cost, this is the commitment we wish to reaffirm today. Ladies and gentlemen, this mission requires us to always be on the side of the victims of abuses, and at the same time to ensure the protection of those who are defending human rights themselves and their families. Similarly, our role is also to devote ourselves to the search for solution for a lasting peace. Yes, we need peace in Cameroon and in our Central Africa region. It is with this objective that we have initiated and are implemented certain actions such as the inter-community dialogues. Talked Cameroon and Central Africa Republic in the first instance, and soon in the another countries of the sub-region. As a next step, we entered to establish a Center for Research, Documentation on Human Rights, Democracy, Refuge, and Early Warming for the prevention of conflict, threat, and reprisal against human rights defenders in Central Africa. It's become necessary and emergency. With your support and your increased accompaniment, we are certain to make a more effective contribution to the realization of these dreams. C'est pourquoi nous sollicitons toute votre bienveillance, tout votre soutien, de quelque nature que ce soit, financier, technique, as Robert Foundation Kennedy himself said, this is your father, je cite, "The purpose of life is to contribute in some way to making things better." Is not right? This is not my citation, it's the Robert Kennedy. The purpose of life is to contribute in some way to making things better. Together, we'll continue on the path toward and just and peaceful Cameroon, Africa, and the world. Long life the Robert Foundation Kennedy Human Rights Organization, the United States of America, Cameroon, and Central Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful words and for the courage of your words. You know, I think the hardest thing about being a human rights defender is the impact on one's children. And as the child of a human rights defender who lost his life doing this work, I just want you to know that as painful as that is, the inspiration and the power that you hold for everyone, for your kids, for all the world, makes all the difference. So thank you. Your children will always be proud of you. And now, Felix. Felix is a passionate community leader, a human rights advocate, and the director of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, a leading advocate for the human rights of Cameroonians in the conflict-stricken Anglophile region. He established the Cameroon Anglophile Civil Society Consortium. In 2016 and 2017, he led those massive peaceful protests. These protests were met with a brutal response from security forces, and Felix was targeted, arrested, blindfolded, cuffed, charged with serious offenses punishable by death, and spent 9 months in prison. Undeterred, upon release, he continued advocating for nonviolent change, documented thousands of cases of human rights abuses and violence in Cameroon, and proposed a political and humanitarian solution to the Anglophile crisis in Cameroon to avoid a civil war, for which he should be getting the Nobel Peace Prize. Felix, it is my honor to present you with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award.
It's always very difficult, to be the last speaker, because probably the script you have, somebody's already said everything you have to say. But as a lawyer, you were trained to speak. So you have to speak on your feet, whether you like it or not. When the senator was quoting the Robert Kennedy speech in South Africa in 1966, that I'd slept the whole night memorizing it, I'm like, oh, what am I going to say today? Today marks exactly 5 years, 4 months, 21 days, and 2 hours, precisely on the 17th of January, 2017, when myself and Dr. Fontem, as the leaders of the Cameroon Anglophone Civil Society Consortium, were arrested, blindfolded, handcuffed, and thrown behind a car for a journey that took 6 hours to Yaoundé. We were charged, amongst others, with secession, terrorism, group rebellion, attempt to change the form of the state, and certain crimes that I would never imagine that someone like me could be charged with such crimes. But our only crime was that we fought for our people. We spoke against marginalization. We peacefully protested against the systematic erosion of the common law. We fought against injustices in all shape and form. We felt that oppression, suppression, and marginalization was supposed to be a thing of the past. But when you live in a society where the anti-terrorism law of 2014 can be used to arrest each and everyone seated here It's enough for this gathering for us to be brandished terrorists because we tried to speak truth to power. Spent 9 months in jail, one of the most difficult times in my life. But then we're still emboldened to continuously to speak on behalf of the people. Upon release, I've still advocated for peaceful means to bring changes in Cameroon. Because I think that's the only legacy we can leave for posterity. When we stand up against oppression, when we stand up to be counted, to fight against the injustices in our society. The President, Kerry Kennedy, Senator Chris Combs, Leader Steny Hoyer. I hope I tried in pronouncing the name because you ended up with Balla. At least I tried two of the names, you know. I would stand by all existing protocols. I come from a country where you fail to respect and acknowledge a dignitary, it's enough to have any problem. So because I don't know everyone who is here, I would just stand on existing protocols of Kerry. So if there's any problem, Kerry should be held responsible and not my humble self. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed truly humbled by your decision to honor me, my work, my mission, my vision, and my team in this wonderful way. I'm grateful that a little I've done to promote human rights, justice, peace, and the rule of law in my country has enjoyed attention of this prestigious organization. This award, to me, is an eloquent testimony of the ripple hope that the venerated Robert Kennedy said in his famous speech in South Africa. Unfortunately, the speech has been quoted extensively, and I will not go into citing the speech. But it shows that when you put your life at stake, when you give hope to a people, when you fight for a cause that you believe, you might be recognized. But even if you don't recognize, there are people who would acknowledge the fact that you did something to make this place a better world than we made it. And I think that is what I did. That is what we did as members of the Cameroon Society, Anglophone Society Consortium. And I think that is what all the human rights defenders in Cameroon, Africa, and the world are doing, just to leave a legacy for posterity. Although this is a personal award, it has always and will remain a result of dedicated teamwork from each and every past member of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. The center has a connection with the United States because in 2005, a group of African students who were studying international human rights law at Notre Dame, we decided to form the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. And one of the senior staff members of this foundation, Angelita, happened to be a classmate of ours during our days in Notre Dame. So this ripple effect, this little hope, this little baby that we planted in 2004 has germinated to an organization, to an institution that we have been honored here today. So I want to sincerely thank the Robert Kennedy Foundation for honoring us, for honoring the work that we've been doing, and for honoring each and every member of this organization. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate my human rights wife, Maximilienne Gombe, for this award. Maxi is an amazing lady, but it shows that Anglophones and Francophones can work together. It shows that we can rise above our tribal, above our linguistic, above our religious, above our legal differences to build a stronger and a united country where the strength would be our unity in diversity. We would disagree without necessarily being disagreeable. And my work with Maxi should be taken as an example for each and every Cameroonian. I see a lot of Cameroonians here, Francophones and Anglophones. I see my young daughter who is a Cameroonian. She's an American equally. But I expect her to look at Cameroon beyond the confines of an Anglophone. She should look at Cameroon from the prism of a Cameroonian, because we would only build when we work together. The despot, our leaders, they take advantage of our disunity to always perpetuate themselves in power. And if we Cameroonians, from all the language divides, don't learn how to work together, we might not see the change that we need. And since we are supposed to be the change that we need in Cameroon, we must work towards a better Cameroon. The organization honors the legacy of Robert Kennedy, whose work in solidarity with social justice movement serves as an inspiration for many, motivating us to seek positive change to build a better world. That is equally what we do at the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. Our country has been plunged into a conflict since 2016. It's only gotten worse. Human rights violation is running riot. Egregious crimes committed by both parties in a conflict is something that we cannot list them here today. Arbitrary arrests, brutal killings, rape, the razing of villages, killing of unarmed civilians, illegal and unlawful detention is the order of the day in the Southwest and the Northwest regions. We still have friends who we went to jail with them in 2017, and they are still there. They were arrested just for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. A lot of them committed no crime. And I'm expecting that we have congressmen here. We have a lot of influential persons who can raise their voices for the Mancho BBCs, for the Penterens, for each and every one who is in the dungeons in the Cameroonian prison for doing nothing. All these political prisoners, something has to be done for them. I imagine myself in one of these dark cells, 45 days of solitary confinement. I think that we should raise our voices for those who are still in jail. I think that we should speak out. A few days ago, the conflict was being ranked as one of the most underreported conflicts. Kerry, we have about 4.4 million people in need of humanitarian support. Thousands have been displaced. 700,000 kids cannot go to school. And I'm sure the US was conscious of that. That is why they decided to place Cameroon under the TPS. And that is something where we want to thank all the US congressional leaders who fought for that. We want to thank the Cameroonian diaspora also who fought for that we should continue to fight for the right things. With very limited human, material, and financial resources, coupled with the fear of the unknown, it takes a brave team of human rights activists to be able to speak truth to both parties in this conflict. This is what we do at the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa. I remember when I spoke to the late Cardinal Toumé, an icon in Cameroon and the world at large. And Cardinal Toumé told me that when both parties in a conflict criticize you, it means you're doing a good job. Because we've taken up the challenge to document gross and systematic violations. We have risen above the fact that it's not because I speak English that I would accept violations perpetrated by non-state arms groups that are fighting on my behalf. Human rights violations anywhere, perpetrated by anybody, should be condemned. We cannot pick and choose the human rights that will condemn. The state has committed lots of human rights violations. But I urge my brothers here in the diaspora today to try to get the facts right, to try to call both parties to order, because we would not come out of this crisis if we don't fight the culture of unaccountability and impunity. Impunity is running riot in Cameroon, where those who are ruling us are not accountable to each and every one of us. Corruption is the order of the day. I'm sure some of you have read the Glencore report about the massive corruption that is taking place in Cameroon. But there is something which is prevailing in the country: kidnapping, ransom taking, preventing our kids from going to school. All of us here must rise as one man with one voice to condemn such practices. Otherwise, we would have a Cameroon where our kids will not be able in the future, will not be able to read and write, and will not be able to emerge to meet the challenges that kids of their age face in a competitive world. We expect the United States of America to be very supportive of us. We acknowledge the fact that they've done a commendable job, but we think that more has to be done. We believe that some of those who use the US as a safe haven to incite violence should also be brought to justice. We also believe that there should be targeted sanctions. Well, we also believe that there should be targeted sanctions against some of the leaders of the country who are committing mayhem. If you do a general sanction, it might not really work because most of these people have a lot of wealth It will end up with the man on the street. It will end up with the little person who cannot afford. But if you have visa restrictions, freezing of the account, preventing their kids from traveling and their wives to come to the US to do shopping, it might go a long way to help the situation. We equally also expect the United States to speak louder. The volume has not been increased. We watch Ukraine. We watch prime time on CNN. We should not pick and choose. It should not be they against us. Human rights violations anywhere should be condemned. Because when they came for an Anglophone, I did nothing. And when they came for a Francophone, there was nobody to speak for me. We embolden some of these dictators. When we fail to condemn one atrocities, we give them the right. We embolden them to keep on committing atrocities. So I believe that the US also has a lot to play. Acknowledging what you've done, but I think much has to be done. But I have hope for the Cameroon of the future. I see Cameroonians working together. I see us building a country where we accept diversity. It might not be with the current regime, but I think Cameroonians have learned a lot that we are different. The Anglophones and Francophones are different. In spite of all the problems we have in Cameroon, I still have hope. The country is blessed. We have wonderful human resources. If you look at this hall, you would see one of all the finest brains that you can have. Chris Fomonyo, Henriette, wonderful people that can build a country. So I would challenge some of them seated here also to come back home and join us. To come back home and join us to build the Cameroon that we want for our kids. This country was built by the toil, the blood, and the sweat of some of your forefathers. If we want this Cameroon to change, some of us have to make sacrifices. I think that's why we are in Cameroon, to make these necessary sacrifices. And it's on this note of hope that I accept this award. This award would be dedicated to each and everyone who has suffered human rights violation in the country. To those of our friends and brothers who are serving life imprisonment in jail for just speaking out for the right of self-determination, which is a fundamental human right. For the kids who cannot go to school, for each and every Cameroonian whose rights have been violated. I sincerely thank you, Kerry, and your entire team. I sincerely thank the Robert Kennedy Foundation for honoring me with this. If I were to tell you my story, it's been a long and a checkered history. From someone who grew in the ghettos of Great Support to be standing here today. My dad was buried when I was in jail. I could not have the opportunity to give him a decent burial. The only time I cried in jail, because I don't really shed tears. I don't have time to shed tears. But I cried when he was buried in my absence. It's been a long history. So to stand here today to address you people is something wonderful in my life. And I want to thank everybody who made it. Everybody who supported me. Everybody who supported our organization. Everybody who spoke on our behalf. I see some of my lawyers here who've moved in the US, who were coming to jail every day to provide pro bono services. I see some of my friends here who worked with this human rights organization to put pressure for us to be released. I want to thank you. And I see my little daughter here, who I call my senator in the making, who went through a lot. Whilst I was in jail. But from the depth of my heart, I thank you. I thank you. I thank you.
You know, when Daddy was in this room that day in March 16, 1968, and he looked at what was going on in our country, he said that he runs for the presidency, he said, because I cannot stand aside. We're surrounded, this whole room is full of people who cannot stand aside. We are so blessed by your leadership and your moral clarity and your vision before us in showing us what it means to not stand aside. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming. We're done. We're done.